Welcome back. In this video, we're going to make our first Insight Maker model. So as you recall, we left off on the website. We were on the systems approach to population ecology, and we just left off talking about computer programming and why it's so important. And so now we can actually get started with doing some very basic population modeling using this very friendly tool, Insight Maker, which is a sneaky programming language. It's very powerful, but it's also really easy to use. So we go to, you can make a new tab in your browser. You can follow along and just go to insightmaker.com. So I'll give you a second to do that. And you should see this, actually, your screen might look a little different if you haven't registered for an Insight Maker account. So please register for an Insight Maker account if you have not done so already. If you haven't done that, you really won't be able to do anything, any modeling at all. So you can see I'm already logged into Insight Maker. So you'll see a screen somewhat like this when you log in, and you'll be able to create a new insight. So that's what so make sure you log in to Insight Maker if you haven't done that already and create a new insight. It just takes a second to pull up this window. This is the window you'll see when you make a new insight. It'll give you this demo model here, which, the first time you open the screen, you might look through the demo. It just gives you the very basics, but we're going to go through that as well. So I'm just going to clear the demo. In general, that's the first step. So you have this nice blank workspace. All right, here we go. So Insight Maker is a stock and flow modeling system. A stock is an accumulation or a storage of something. In the case of this class, it's going to be mostly individuals in a population. So the number of squirrels or the number of bear or whatever we're modeling, it's that. So that's what a stock is. We can add a stock by going to, there's two ways to do it. Either you can right click in the screen in the white space somewhere here and you can create a stock, or you can go up here to the upper left hand corner where it says add primitive and just add a stock that way. So we can have any number of stocks we want in our workspace. Right now, I'm just going to highlight this and delete it because I only want one stock right now. So make sure you have one stock in your workspace. All right. And you can name the stock. If you click on the stock, you'll see this context menu with all sorts of options for what you can do with a stock. One of the things you can do is rename it. So we're working with a wild population. So let's call it moose. I don't know why I always start with moose. I just think they're kind of cool. This isn't going to be, let me just disclaimer right here. This is not going to be a realistic moose model, but it is a very, very, very simple stock and flow model, and it's a good place to start. So we have a moose population. By default, if you click on the stock again, you have a lot of options here. One of the options, of course, is the number of animals or the number of things in the stock to begin with. It's called the initial value field. Let's change that to 50. So we have 50 moose to start with. All right, this is year 0, the very beginning of the simulation. We have exactly 50 moose. All right, does that make sense? So we have a stock, we have 50 moose. But the thing about stocks and flows, now a stock cannot change its value over time if it doesn't have a flow. So if you were to simulate the population right now, you'll see that the population will stay 50 forever, all right? Because it doesn't have a flow, it can't change. The value can't change. The initial value is 50, the value in year 1 is 50, year 2 is 50. It can't change without what's called a flow. So make sure that this flows and transitions button is highlighted. And then all you need to do to create a flow is just hover over the moose stock and drag an arrow out from the stock. And that arrow is your flow. That's the thing that can cause your population to change over time. You'll notice that the arrow is pointing away from the stalk, and that means that this is a flow out. A flow out of the population would be deaths. If we're talking about a wild population, let's reverse that. Just you hit this reverse connection direction button, and you can change the direction of the arrow. So the arrow is now pointing into the stalk, and this is an inflow, and we can name the flow. If you click on the flow arrow itself, you can change the name of the flow to births. So we can now think of a population of moose that now has an ability to change over time due to new additions into the population or births. And you'll see that the flow by default, the flow rate is 0. Let's change that to 1. And now you'll see if you hit the simulate button, you'll see the population increases over time because every year you add 1 new moose to the population. All right. And you have a nice linear increase in the population. The Top Hat question to follow this video, which we'll go over on Wednesday, asks why this may not be a very realistic population model and what we could do to make this model more realistic. So we'll go over that on Wednesday, but this is just a starting place. A couple other things to note. If you hover over the flow arrow here, you'll see an equal sign. Sorry, my dog is barking in the background. I'm just going to keep going. The births flow has this equal sign. If you click on the equal sign, you get the equation editor, which allows you to build more complex relationships. We're going to use that a lot. So you don't always need to just, define the relationship in here. You actually have an ability to define very complex relationships. You'll see a lot of options, which we're not going to go over right now, but just know that they're there. There's a lot of options for really complex things you can do to define how your stock is going to change over time. That is the flow. The flow specifies how the stock changes over time. So this equation editor allows you to do that. Right now, you could just change the number in here, make a constant in there, and that's fine. And one more thing before we end, let's just add deaths into this model. And obviously I can just drag that another flow. I can add any number of flows out or flows in to this model. Right now I just want 2, so I'm going to delete these additional ones, but just so you know that you can add any number of flows. And let's name this flow deaths because it's an outflow from a population. And we can define that as 1 death per year, and we can now see we still have a growing population. One interesting kind of nice thing you can do is add a so-called value slider so if you go into the context menu again, if you click on the flow, you'll see the flow context menu, and one of the things you can do is add a value slider. I'll show you what that is. Let's do that for deaths too. We're going to show value slider, and now you'll see we have these nice slider bars on the right hand side of your screen, and that makes it really easy to change the value of these different flows. One thing to note is that it's giving you decimals. Decimals aren't the greatest for individuals because individual animals really are units. You can't have a half an individual or a quarter, and so it's kind of unrealistic to have that. You can actually change that setting in the value slider. Oops, that's not what I wanted to. Let's go back to the context menu, show value slider. You can change the slider step to 1. And you can change the minimum and maximum of the slider bars too. So maybe I'll make that 0 to 10 in units of 1. And I'll do the same for deaths. I'm going to change the slider step to 1 and make the maximum 10. So 0 to 10 deaths per year. And now this is a little more realistic. You can only have whole individuals being added or subtracted from the population every year. So that's kind of nice. And one last thing, of course, with any model or any document you're writing or anything, you really want to save it so you don't have to, so if the computer crashes or whatever, you don't lose everything. You can save to the cloud. In fact, it automatically saves to the cloud, but you'd probably want to give it a name, and so you can remember what it is. So let's give it a name. Let's call it Unrealistic Moose Model. And you have the option here of making it a public insight that is available. It could be available to anyone who wants to find it on the web, or you can make it private. So that's your call. And you can save it. And now it is a saved model. And when you load your Insight Maker, so if you go back to your Insight Maker screen, your home screen, once you've signed in, you'll see that model is now available to you. I have tons of others because I have been working with Insight Maker for a really long time, but you'll probably just have this one available, and every other model you save will also be available to you, and you can pick up where you left off and make edits and keep building from it. Or if you wanted to, we want to start adding complexity to the model, you could start with a simpler model. You could just load this model up and then keep building from it. All right. One other thing to note, this is the last thing I will point out in this video, is that once you've saved your model, you'll have this option called Clone Insight. You will be using this a lot, and this is one thing that's not quite as intuitive about Insight Maker, but it's something that's really useful. So just be aware that if you wanted, say, to you're doing one of the lab exercises for this class, and you want to hand in a model. So you have this model and it's finalized, it's ready to go, and ready for your TAs or me to check over. But you want to use this model as the springboard to build another model. You don't necessarily want to change this model because you handed this in and it's done. Like, this is a final model. What you can do is go to Clone Insight and make a clone of the model that you just built. And now you have another version of that, and you can save it as something else. So you can go to Edit Info up here, and you can save the model as More Realistic Moose Model. And this is useful because now I have this other model that I can now start making more additions to, and I can, add other variables, whatever, and make a more realistic model, something like that. But you still have, if you go back to your home screen, you still have that other version saved. All right. So this allows you to have multiple versions of the same model, and it allows you, if you want to, again, you're going to be asked to turn in Insight Maker models for this class. You don't want to be continuing to add to those models or changing them if you already have it perfectly ready to that it already addresses the question you're being asked. And so you can make a clone and do whatever you want with the clone model, whereas this model is now fixed. Oops, this isn't the right model, but I can pull up the unrealistic moose model, and that's your original model that you made. All right. It'll become clearer as we go, and I'll go over it more in class on Wednesday. I just wanted to point that out. And all right, good luck. Happy modeling.